The Solari Empire was renowned across the galaxy for three things: beauty, power, and pride. Its worlds glittered like jewels among the stars. Its cities soared into the heavens on towers of crystal and living glass. Its nobles wore garments woven from starlight itself, and its rulers carried themselves with the certainty of a civilization that had never known defeat. At the heart of that empire stood the Palace of Radiance, and on this day, its great audience hall shone brighter than ever. Violet light spilled from enormous crystal pillars that stretched toward a ceiling lost in shimmering mist. Silver banners drifted lazily through unseen currents, their embroidered symbols glowing softly in the air. Ethereal music echoed through the chamber, haunting melodies that seemed less like sound and more like memories given form. Along both sides of the hall stood dozens of Solari nobles. Their robes shimmered with living threads of light. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to open contempt, and every eye in the room was fixed on the same figure. A human. Captain Elias Vance stood alone at the center of the chamber. No royal garments, no ceremonial jewels, no armor forged from exotic alloys. Only the dark blue uniform of Earth's Star Service. Simple, practical, unremarkable. Among the radiant splendor of the Solari court, he looked almost painfully ordinary. His short brown hair was neatly trimmed. His gray eyes remained calm despite the hundreds of hostile gazes directed toward him. His uniform lacked the dazzling brilliance of alien nobility, yet somehow, it appeared more honest than anything else in the room. To the watching nobles, he seemed fragile, small, a creature from a young and insignificant world that had only recently reached the stars. Yet there was something unsettling about him. He did not bow his head. He did not fidget. He did not seem intimidated by the power surrounding him. Instead, he stood perfectly still, hands folded behind his back, boots planted firmly upon the polished crystal floor. As if he belonged there. As if he had every right to stand before an empire. High above him, Princess Elira watched from her throne, carved from a single flawless crystal. She was breathtaking. Tall even by Solari standards, graceful as flowing water, and radiant beneath the violet glow of the chamber. Silver-white hair cascaded over her shoulders like liquid moonlight, framing a face that poets across 100 worlds had tried, and failed, to describe adequately. Yet her attention was not on the nobles, not on the musicians, not on the grandeur of her court. It was fixed entirely on the human standing below. Because unlike everyone else in the chamber, Captain Elias Vance was the only person who looked at the princess of the Solari Empire and seemed completely unimpressed. Her hair, pale as moonlight, spilled over her shoulders like liquid silver, and her eyes gleamed like polished gems. Upon her brow rested a thin crown of silver, its center glowing faintly with a shard of captured starlight. Her beauty was undeniable, but so was her authority. When she spoke, her voice carried across the hall, soft but commanding. "Human," she said, and her tone made the word sound like both a question and a challenge. "You stand before the court of the Solari Empire. We have heard strange reports of your kind, tales of reckless growth, of swarming colonies of endless children. Our scholars say it cannot be true. No species breeds outside its season. Yet whispers reach us that yours does." The nobles murmured among themselves, some scoffing, some curious. Era raised her hand, and they fell silent. Her silver eyes narrowed slightly. "Tell me, Captain of Earth, is it true? Can your kind truly bring forth life at any time?" The hall was silent, waiting for the human's answer. Elias did not flinch. His voice was calm, steady, though there was warmth beneath it. "Your Highness," he said with respect, "it is true. For us, every season is our season." The reaction was immediate. Laughter rippled through the hall, sharp and mocking. Some nobles covered their mouths with jeweled hands. Others leaned toward each other, whispering insults about the foolish, desperate species that dared to lie in front of their princess. To them, the idea was absurd. To the Solari, life was sacred and rare. Their own people could only bear children once in 100 years, and only during a single brief season when the stars aligned. It was the rhythm of their kind, an unbreakable law of nature. The very thought that these fragile creatures from Earth could ignore such laws seemed impossible. To them, Elias's words were not only foolish, but dangerous, an insult to the order of life itself. But Princess Elra did not laugh. Her face remained still, her gaze fixed firmly on the human standing before her. For a long moment, the only sound in the hall was the faint hum of the musicians. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Do you expect me to believe," she said slowly, her voice cutting through the silence, "that your people can create children at any time? That you are not bound by the turning of stars, nor by the ancient laws of cycle and season?" Elias met her gaze without fear. His answer was simple, but the words carried weight. "Yes," he said, "any time, any place. Our kind carries that gift. It is not bound by moonlight or by season. It is bound only by choice and by love." The nobles froze. The laughter died. The hall became very quiet. For the Solari, this was not only unthinkable, it was almost blasphemy. A people who could kindle life whenever they wished. It sounded like power far too dangerous to be trusted. Princess Elra sat back against her throne, her silver eyes glowing faintly. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but every soul in the hall heard it. "Impossible," she breathed. Yet in her heart, a seed of curiosity had already been planted. The silence in the great Solari hall was heavy, almost suffocating. No one dared breathe too loudly. Princess Ella's soft whisper, "Impossible," still hung in the air like a challenge that could not be taken back. Dozens of noble eyes burned with suspicion, and yet not one could look away from the lone human standing calmly at the center. Elias Vance did not move. He stood steady, his hands still folded behind his back, his shoulders squared. His calmness only made the salary more unsettled. To them, lies were told with nervous voices, with eyes that darted, and hands that shook. But this human did none of that. He spoke his shocking truth as if it were nothing more than a simple fact, as if the sky was blue or the stars were bright. "Princess." Elra tilted her head slightly, her silver hair shimmering under the violet light of the hall. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion, but beneath it lay something else. Curiosity, faint and dangerous. "You stand in my hall before my court," she said, her voice now firmer, steadier. "And you claim your people can bring forth children without the blessing of season. You claim your kind multiplies as freely as you breathe." She paused, her words sharp as a blade. "Do you understand what you are saying?" Elias inclined his head respectfully. "I do, Your Highness." Her eyes hardened. "Then explain it. Explain what you mean. If your kind truly bears life without the order of nature, what stops you from drowning in your own numbers? What prevents your world from collapsing under endless mouths to feed?" At this, the court stirred. The nobles nodded, their suspicion, finding voice in their princess's words. To them, humanity's claim was not only strange, it was terrifying. A people who could multiply endlessly, could easily overrun other worlds, consume resources without restraint, and spread like fire across the stars. Elias drew a breath. His face was calm, but his eyes, gray, steady, unshaken, held a quiet strength. "It is true that we can bear children in any season," he said, his voice carrying clearly to the edges of the hall. "But it is not without reason. Not every man and woman has children. Some wait until they are ready. Some choose never to. And even in our freedom, we suffer hunger, hardship, and loss. We do not escape struggle. We endure it." His words struck the hall differently than before. Some nobles frowned, some whispered, and others looked away as if they were uncomfortable. Elra, however, kept her eyes locked on him. She leaned forward slightly, her crown glinting like a shard of moonlight. "You endure," she repeated softly. "You speak of suffering as if it is a choice." Elias shook his head gently. "Not a choice, Princess. A reality. But it is in our nature to face it. Even when times are darkest, even when there is nothing but hunger and war, still our people bring forth children. Not because it is easy, not because it is safe, but because we believe in tomorrow." The hall was silent again. His words carried weight, but they sounded dangerous to salary ears. For a people who saw birth as a sacred, rare gift, given once, in centuries, the idea that humans could bring life into the world, even in times of despair, was nearly unthinkable. It was hope, mixed with madness. One noble finally broke the silence. His voice was sharp, mocking. but his eyes betrayed unease. And what happens, human, when your hope fails? What happens when tomorrow does not come? Do your children starve while you tell yourselves stories of endurance? Elias turned his gaze toward the noble. His expression did not harden, nor did his voice rise. Instead, he spoke softly, almost gently. Sometimes, yes, sometimes we fail. Sometimes we lose, more than we can bear. But even then, we try again. Because if we stop, if we choose to wait for permission from the stars, then we will have already surrendered. Life is not only about surviving, it is about continuing, even when the night is long. The noble fell silent, unsettled. The laughter that had filled the hall in the beginning was gone now. No one laughed, no one mocked. They simply listened, their eyes flickering between doubt and something they had never expected to feel: respect. Princess Elira's lips parted, but for a moment, no sound came. She had spent her entire life bound to the laws of her people, accepting them as unshakable truths. Children came only once in 100 years, and only during the sacred season. She herself might never see the birth of her own child. It was the way of things. It had always been. And yet here stood a fragile creature of flesh and bone, telling her that life did not have to bow to the stars, that it could rise at any time, even in the harshest winters, even in the darkest nights. Her voice, when it finally came, trembled despite her effort. "Your kind is reckless," she said. "Reckless and dangerous." Elias bowed his head slightly. "Perhaps, princess, but it is in our recklessness that we endure." Elra sat back slowly upon her crystal throne. She wanted to dismiss him, to call him a liar, to end this strange and unsettling conversation, and yet she could not. For the first time in her long life, she felt something she had never known before: envy. The hall of crystal was no longer filled with laughter. Where once the nobles had mocked, now they only whispered in low voices, their eyes shifting nervously between their princess and the human who stood unshaken. Princess Elra's fingers curled lightly around the armrests of her throne. Her crown glimmered faintly in the violet glow, but her heart felt heavier than before. This human had not only answered her challenge, he had spoken with a quiet fire that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. And yet the claim remained beyond reason. No matter what words he spoke, no matter what stories he told, the truth of nature could not be changed. Children without season, life without cycle. It was madness. It was impossible. At last, she leaned forward, her voice sharp enough to silence even the whispers of her court. "Then prove it," she said. The words struck the air like a stone-shattering glass. Nobles gasped, and a ripple of shock traveled through the hall. To demand proof of such a thing was bold, even scandalous. Life for the Solari was sacred. To ask a stranger to demonstrate the truth of life was to walk on the edge of blasphemy. But Elra did not retreat. She kept her eyes locked on Elias Vance, watching for even the smallest crack in his calm face. "Words are wind, Captain," she continued, her tone colder now. "They vanish as soon as they are spoken. If your kind truly carries such a gift, then show me. Show this court something we cannot deny." The silence that followed was painful. Even the musicians stopped, their strange notes dying in the air. All eyes fell on the human. Elias drew in a slow breath, then exhaled. His face did not betray anger or fear, only thoughtfulness. At last he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Your Highness," he said, "you ask for proof of a miracle that takes months to grow, years to cherish. I cannot summon a child into your hall as one might conjure flame from a torch. That is not the way of life. Life takes time. Life takes care." Some nobles scoffed. "Convenient," one muttered. "He hides behind the excuse of time." Another sneered. "Perhaps his kind breeds lies more easily than children." A ripple of cruel laughter followed, but it was weak, uncertain, no longer the strong mockery of before. Elra raised her hand, and silence fell again. Her gaze never left Elias. "Then what can you show me, human?" she demanded. "What proof can you place before me now? If you cannot, then all your words are nothing." Elias placed his hand gently over his chest, just above his heart. His voice carried, not with volume, but with weight. "Then I will show you the reason why." The court frowned in confusion. The princess herself tilted her head, her silver hair glinting in the light. "The reason? Why?" "Yes," Elias said, lowering his hand but keeping his eyes steady on hers. The reason why we bring forth children even in famine, why we carry new life even in war, why when all hope is lost, we still choose to begin again. He lifted his head, his gaze sweeping across the court. His words were simple, but they echoed in the chamber, as if the crystal walls themselves carried them. Because we are not guided by the turning of stars. We are guided by love, by the belief that tomorrow can be brighter than today. That even if we fall, our children may rise. The nobles shifted uneasily. Some looked away as if the humans' words struck too close to truths they did not wish to hear. Others glared, trying to cling to their pride, but none could deny the weight of his voice. Princess Arira sat very still. The word love lingered in her mind, like a note that refused to fade. Her people spoke of duty, of cycle, of fate. But rarely, so rarely, did they speak of love. Love was personal, love was fragile, and yet, this human spoke of it as though it were the greatest power in the universe. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than before, though no less sharp. You say much, Captain, but words of love are still words. What is love to the emptiness of hunger? What is love to the void of space? Love cannot define nature. Elias bowed his head slightly. No, Princess. Love does not define nature. Love is nature. It is the force that drives us to continue, even when reason says we should stop. That is our proof. Not in this moment, not in a hall of crystal and starlight, but in every child we choose to bring into the world, even when the world tells us not to. The hall was silent once more. No laughter now, no mockery, only silence, and the faint sound of hearts that dared to feel what they had long denied. Ara sat back slowly. She wanted to dismiss him, to end this conversation, to keep her heart wrapped in the armor of tradition. Yet she could not. She had demanded proof. And though he had shown no child, no miracle to touch or see, he had shown her something deeper. The reason why, and against her will. It unsettled her more than any proof of flesh ever could. The violet light in the crystal hall shimmered faintly, as if the walls themselves listened. Princess Aria leaned back in her throne, her hands resting lightly on the carved crystal armrests. Her face was calm, but inside her heart there was turmoil. She had asked for proof, and the human had answered, not with flesh or miracles, but with words that felt heavier than stone. Elias Vance stood in the center of the hall, a single man before a sea of doubtful eyes. His uniform was plain, his form unremarkable compared to the tall and radiant Solari nobles. And yet, when he spoke, the entire hall listened. He took a slow breath, his voice steady, but filled with quiet strength. Perhaps you think my kind reckless. Perhaps you think we are dangerous, and in many ways you are right. We grow fast, we spread far, and we carry our burdens with us. But do you know why, Princess? Do you know why we never stop? The question hung in the air. No one answered. Even the nobles who had mocked him earlier dared not interrupt. Elias's eyes softened. Because we hope. A ripple of unease traveled through the court. Some nobles frowned. Others exchanged puzzled glances. Hope? The word sounded too simple, too small to explain something so vast as the survival of a species. But Elias did not falter. He stepped forward slightly, his voice rising, not in anger, but in clarity. On Earth, our world, seasons change. Winters come harsh and long, storms destroy, floods drown fields, wars burn our homes. There have been times when our people starved, when our cities fell, when everything told us there was no future. And still, even then, children were born. His words painted images in the minds of those listening. They could almost see it. A small fire burning in the ruins of a city where a mother held her newborn child. A starving village, where against all odds another family chose to bring forth life. To the series such an act was madness, but to humans, it was something else. Elias placed his hand over his heart again. We do not wait for the stars to grant us permission. We do not wait for perfect seasons or perfect times. We make life because we believe tomorrow can be better, even when today is cruel. That is our lesson. That is what it means to be human. The hall was silent. Not even the faint hum of the musicians returned. Nobles shifted uncomfortably, as if his words touched a wound they did not know they carried. For them, children were rare, sacred, a treasure born only once in 100 years. The idea of bringing life in the midst of ruin, was unthinkable, perhaps even blasphemous. Princess Elra's gaze softened slightly. She had been raised to believe that fate ruled all, that the stars decided when her people could renew themselves. She had accepted it without question, as all Solari did. But now hearing this fragile human speak of endurance and hope, she felt the ground beneath her certainty shake. Still she could not surrender so easily. Her voice, though gentler, still carried steel. You say your kind brings forth life, even in hunger, even in war. But is that not cruelty to bring children into a world filled with pain? Elias looked at her directly, his gray eyes unwavering. It is not cruelty, princess. It is courage. We do not promise our children a world without pain. We promise them the chance to live, to dream, to love. Even if the world is broken, life itself is worth the struggle. A soft gasp escaped one of the younger nobles, though they quickly silenced themselves. Elira's lips pressed into a thin line, his words pierced deeper than she wished, stirring something she had long buried. She thought of her own people, so few children, so rare, so delayed. She thought of her own life, perhaps destined to end without ever holding a child of her own. She had told herself it did not matter, that duty was enough. Yet here was a man telling her that his kind chose life again and again, not because it was easy, but because it was hard, because they had faith in tomorrow. For a moment, Elra felt something unfamiliar burn in her chest. Not anger, not suspicion, something else, something dangerously close to longing. Her voice, when it returned, was quieter. Hope, she whispered almost to herself. You speak of it as though it is stronger than hunger, stronger than death. Elias nodded once. It is because hunger ends when the stomach is filled and death ends when life is gone. But hope continues. It carries us forward. It gives us the strength to endure what should break us. The words lingered in the air like a sacred chant. The nobles did not laugh now. They did not sneer. Some looked unsettled, some thoughtful, and a few looked moved. Princess Elra sat back slowly, her silver eyes never leaving the human. For the first time in her long reign, she did not know whether to fear or to admire the words she had heard. They were dangerous words, but they were also beautiful. And in the quiet corners of her heart, the princess realized that this fragile human had given her something she had never dared imagine before. A lesson not of the stars, a lesson of the heart. The crystal hall felt heavier than before, as if the very air was thick with the weight of what had been spoken. Princess Elra sat upon her throne, her silver crown glowing faintly, her eyes fixed on the human before her. The nobles stood silently now, no longer laughing, no longer mocking. They were waiting for her answer, for her judgment, for the next word that would decide whether this strange human's claims would be accepted or crushed. But's heart was restless. Elias Vance had spoken of hope, of courage, of bringing life into the world even when the world was cruel. His words still echoed inside her, and though she wanted to dismiss them, she could not. They clung to her thoughts like thorns, pricking at her certainty. Her lips parted at last, her voice soft, but trembling with unspoken weight. Hope alone cannot shape life, she said. Our kind suffers long centuries waiting for children. We wait for the sacred season for the stars to align. We wait because we must. And you claim your kind brings forth life as easily as breathing, as recklessly as fire spreading in dry grass. Do you not fear what comes of it? Do you not fear being consumed by your own abundance? Her words struck the nobles like sparks on dry leaves. They straightened, nodding, murmuring in agreement. Yes, this was the truth. The Solari had always believed that strict order was the only way to survive. To abandon it was to invite chaos, to invite destruction. But Elias did not flinch. He lifted his head, his gray eyes meeting silver gaze without fear. We do fear it, he said. We fear hunger. We fear sickness. We fear wars born from too many mouths and too few fields. We fear it all. He paused, his voice lowering, steady and firm. But we do not run from it. We face it. We work. We fight. We build. We fail. And still we try again. Because life is not given to us by the stars, princess. It is carried in our hands, in our choices, in the love we give to our children. That is what makes us human. We do not wait for permission to love. We do not wait for permission to hope. The hall was silent. His words rang too true, too raw to be dismissed as simple boasting. The Solari nobles looked at one another uneasily, as if something deep inside them had been unsettled. Princess Ira sat very still. On her face the mask of calm royalty remained, but inside her heart was trembling. She had lived her entire life under rules carved by tradition and bound by the stars. She had never questioned them. Children were rare because the stars said so. Families were small because fate demanded it. That was how it had always been. Yet this man dared to speak of choice, of defying fate, of taking life in his own fragile hands and carrying it forward through storms and fire, reckless, dangerous, and yet beautiful. Her throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. You speak as though choice is greater than law, as though your will is stronger than the stars themselves. Elias's answer was quiet, but every syllable struck like a bell. Sometimes it is. The nobles gasped. Some glared, scandalized. To speak of defying the stars was nearly sacrilege, but Elias did not waver. He stood steady, his simple uniform, plain against the glittering robes of the salary, his fragile human body looking so small beneath the towering crystal walls. And yet in that moment, he seemed taller than them all. Belra's breath caught. She felt something stir within her chest, an ache, a longing, a question she had never dared ask. What if he is right? What if we have spent centuries chained to the stars when we could have chosen more? Her hands clenched against the throne. She wanted to silence him, to declare his words false, to protect her people's pride. But when she opened her mouth, the words that escaped were not the ones she expected. Her voice cracked softly. And what of you, Captain? What of you who speak so boldly? Would you bring a child into the world, even if it meant suffering? Even if tomorrow was darker than today? The hall leaned forward, every noble breathless. Elias's expression softened. For the first time, his eyes carried not just strength, but tenderness. Yes, princess, he said, because even in the darkest night, there is always the chance of dawn, and that chance is worth everything. Elra's heart trembled. The nobles stared in silence, and in that moment, the princess of the Solari, so proud, so certain, so bound to the stars, felt a single tear threaten at the corner of her eye. She did not let it fall, not yet, but she could not deny it was there. The human had answered her challenge, and the answer shook her more deeply than she had ever thought possible. The great hall of crystal was silent, so silent that one could hear the faint hum of the glowing walls. The nobles stood frozen, their jeweled robes glittering under the violet light, their expressions torn between disbelief and awe. Princess sat upon her throne, tall and radiant, her crown of silver glowing faintly. But inside her, something had begun to tremble. She had asked the human if he would bring life even into darkness, even into suffering, and he had answered yes, without hesitation, without doubt. His gray eyes had not wavered, his voice had not broken. Yes, he had said, because even in the darkest night, there is always the chance of dawn. The words struck her like an arrow through the heart. For as long as she could remember, Elra had lived under the weight of tradition. The Solari bore children only once every 100 years, in the season of starlight when the heavens aligned. Families waited centuries for that brief moment, praying that fate would grant them even a single child. Era had accepted this as truth, as the way of things. She had told herself it was enough to serve her people, enough to lead, enough to wear the crown of crystal. But deep inside she had always carried a quiet ache, an ache she never dared speak aloud. She had dreamed in rare moments of solitude, of holding a child of her own, her child. She had imagined the sound of a small voice calling her name, the warmth of tiny hands in hers, and each time she had buried the dream, whispering to herself that it was not her place, not her time, not her fate. Now, as she stared at the fragile human before her, that buried dream returned with painful force. Elias Vance was no taller than her shoulder. His frame was lean, his skin soft, his life so short compared to hers. And yet he carried with him a truth that shattered her certainty. He spoke of children not as rare miracles gifted by the stars, but as choices, brave, reckless, beautiful choices. He spoke of love not as weakness, but as strength. And for the first time in her life, Ira wondered if her people had been living in chains of their own making. A soft sound escaped her lips. Before she could stop it, the nobles turned sharply, their eyes widening. A tear. It slid down her pale cheek, glimmering in the violet light like a shard of crystal. The court gasped. Nobles covered their mouths, their jeweled hands trembling. A Solari princess was not supposed to weep. Not before her people, not before an outsider. And yet there it was, a single tear, fragile and undeniable. Elias did not mock her, did not gloat. He bowed his head slightly, his voice gentle, steady as ever. "To create life because you wish for tomorrow," he said softly. What a terrifying, beautiful power. Her silver eyes met his gray ones, and for the first time, she did not see fragility in him. She saw strength different from the strength of armies or the weight of crowns. A strength born from the simple, stubborn refusal to give up. Her voice broke as she whispered, "You carry a burden my people have never known. To shape life without the stars. To protect it. To guide it. Even in hunger and war, it is more frightening than any weapon." And yet, her hand rose slowly, touching the tear on her cheek. And yet, it is beautiful. The hall remained hushed, but the silence had changed. It was no longer filled with scorn or disbelief. It was filled with something else, something softer. Wonder Elias bowed deeply, his hand once more over his heart. "It is not power, princess. It is responsibility. One that we do not always bear well, but one we never abandon." For a long moment, Elra simply looked at him. She thought of her people, bound by centuries of tradition. She thought of herself, bound by duty and fate. And she thought of him standing so small and fragile in her hall, yet carrying a truth vast enough to shake empires. Another tear slipped free, and she did not hide it. She let it fall, shimmering like liquid silver against her pale skin. The nobles did not laugh. They did not whisper. For the first time, they too felt the weight of the human's words. And in that moment, Princess Aera, proud daughter of the Solari, heir to the empire of crystal and starlight, learned what it meant to envy a species she had once thought fragile. Not because of their numbers, not because of their speed, but because of their hearts. The violet light of the crystal hall had dimmed, as if the very walls were listening to the silence that followed. Princess Ella stood slowly from her throne, her tall figure glowing faintly beneath her crown of silver. Her tear had already fallen, but its mark remained. Never before had the court seen her weep. Never before had the nobles witnessed their princess's heart so openly shaken. Elias Vance, the lone human, remained at the center of the hall. His plain uniform looked almost dull against the radiant robes of the Solari nobles, but no one thought him small anymore. He stood tall, his back straight, his eyes steady. In that moment, he seemed larger than the hall itself. The nobles did not speak. They waited, breathless, for their princess. They knew what her next words would mean. If she rejected him, humanity would be branded as liars, as reckless beasts unworthy of trust. If she accepted him, she would change centuries of belief with a single breath. Elra's heart pounded in her chest. Her entire life, she had been taught to obey the rhythm of the stars, to bow to the seasons of fate. Yet here was a fragile creature who had shown her something greater, something terrifying, something beautiful. Humans did not wait for the stars to allow them life. They carried life within them. They made their own seasons. She took a step forward. Her crystal throne shimmered behind her, but she did not look back. Her eyes stayed locked on Elias. "You have shown me proof enough," she said softly. Gasps echoed through the court. Nobles leaned forward, unable to believe their ears. Eller's voice carried, steady, but filled with emotion. "Not proof of your bodies, not proof of flesh or children born before my eyes, but proof of something deeper. Proof of your hearts, of your courage to love in darkness, of your will to hope when all reason says there is none." Her steps were slow but certain as she descended the crystal stairs. Each step rang like a chime of silver. Elias bowed deeply, lowering his gaze, but she lifted her hand. "No, Captain," she said, her voice gentler now. "Do not bow. Stand." He obeyed, lifting his head. Their eyes met, silver and gray, two lights from different worlds. "For centuries," continued, "the Solari have waited for the stars to grant us life. We have bound ourselves in chains of tradition, believing we are powerless before the heavens. But you," her voice trembled, and she let it. "You tell me life is not a gift from the stars. You tell me it is a choice, a burden, a responsibility, and for the first time I believe it." The hall erupted in murmurs, shock, even outrage. But Elra silenced them with a single raised hand. "Listen well," she commanded, her silver eyes sweeping over her court. "This human has spoken a truth we have long forgotten. We thought them fragile, reckless, dangerous, and they are all those things. But in their recklessness lies a strength we cannot deny. They do not wait for destiny. They shape it." Elias's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. His voice, though quiet, reached her clearly. Hope tends to do that. The princess felt another tear threaten her eye. But this time she did not fight it, she let it fall. A Solari princess weeping before her people was no weakness today. It was a declaration. Slowly, Elra extended her hand toward him. The gesture stunned the court. A princess did not reach down to touch an envoy. Not in public, not in her hall, but she did. Elias hesitated for only a heartbeat before placing his hand lightly against hers. Her voice lowered, but the entire hall heard. "Then let it be written, the humans are not fragile. They are not weak. They are a people who endure, and through them, the stars themselves may change." The nobles bowed their heads, some in respect, others in fear, but none dared speak against her. Elias inclined his head, his expression calm, but his eyes shining faintly with emotion. "Thank you, Princess. Humanity does not seek to rule the stars, only to share them." Elra's heart ached at his words. For so long, she had believed her people were alone in their slow, sacred cycle of life. But now she saw a new path, a path lit not by the strict laws of the stars, but by the reckless, dangerous fire of hope. She released his hand slowly, turning back toward her throne. But in her chest, something had changed forever. The Solari Empire would not forget this day, neither would she. And as the human envoy departed the hall, leaving behind only silence and the memory of his words, Princess Elra knew the truth with a certainty that frightened and comforted her all at once. Humans did not wait for permission to live. They did not wait for the stars to allow them love. They simply lived. They simply loved. And that above all was their greatest strength.